and gentlemen, hearty welcome to Vidvat Sabha, one-day seminar on Prevention of Money Laundering Act 2002 and relevant provisions in the Income Tax Act also in that regarding. So, to inaugurate and take the session on this seminar, we have invited our past chairman of Bangalore branch, also past chairman of SIRC of ICI, CA Kota Srinivas with us, and also first technical session speaker, CA Narendra Jain is with us. May request branch chairman escort them on to dais and also welcome them with the floral bouquet. Friends, please welcome Kota Srinivas. Please welcome Narendra Jain. I request branch chairman to make a welcome address.
Good morning, my dear friends. Welcome to today's Vidvat Sabha one-day seminar on anti-money laundering and the interplay with the Income Tax Act. Friends, when we thought of conducting this program, we approached the CA Kota Srinivas to help us to design this program and requested him to be part of this program. He has kindly agreed to be with us, and on behalf of the branch of SIRC of ICI, we extend warm welcome to you, sir. Similarly, whenever we talk about income tax, transfer pricing, anti-money laundering, anything related to these kind of aspects, we always think about CA Narendra Jain. So, we are very happy to be with us to address our members on this topic on behalf of the Institute, Bengali branch, on behalf of the managing committee, and on behalf of all of you present here. Warm welcome to you, sir. Friends, any program we do, the inspiration and the source of inspiration for our programs are you, the esteemed members of our branch. Your response to each and every program is motivation for us to conduct more and more programs. So therefore, heartfelt welcome to each one of you for today's program. Friends, this month, next month, most of the busy schedules are over except some transfer pricing and related tax filing cases or the ROC annual return filing cases. Otherwise, to some extent, we can say members have got little freedom to attend to institutes programs. Therefore, we thought let us conduct more and more programs for November and December. And also, the CP credit, the shortfall, whatever is there, you need to take stock of your accounts and see, okay, what is the shortfall, and ensure that you are going to fulfill that. And for that, the programs are available, online registrations are available. Kindly ensure that registration is done, because no one wants any program we open up, registration will be full. I'm not saying attendance will be full, but registration will be full. Therefore, make sure that you get the registration done, and also whenever you are registering for the amount that you are paying, much more than that amount you are getting the value in the programs, we will ensure that that value is filled in it. Kindly block your calendars for those program dates and make use of the programs. Tomorrow we are going to get another very unique program called Vedic Mathematics and its application in CA profession. Is it something different? Vedic Mathematics and its application in CA profession. Kindly register online and ensure that you are getting benefited out of this kind of a unique program. Lot of research is done by CA Veeraguraman and also Ravi Kumar to understand that Vedic mathematics part of it and how to bring it in CA practice. Lot of effort has gone into that, and Definitely it is going to be a very useful program. Kindly make use of the program. With this, once again, I welcome each one of you for today's one-day seminar and wish you a happy learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for a short and sweet welcome address. Friends, it is my pleasure to introduce C.A. Skuta Srinivas to this august gathering. So, C.A. Skuta is a very popular name in our community. So, he served our institute for more than 2 decades, initially as a member of SICASA for 2 years as a committee member of SICASA. Then 9 years he served for this branch. In the year 2009-10 he was the chairman, and during that year branch got the best branch award, and from that onwards till 2018-19 he was the SARC member, and during 17-18 he was SARC chairman. In that year he was instrumental to collect more than 1.5 crore for CA Benevolent Fund. And he initiated many good initiations in the branch and SARC for the benefit of members and students. So with this brief introduction, I present CA Skuta Srinivas before you. Please join me to welcome him once again. Our technical session speaker, CA Narendra Jain, currently is practicing as advocate. Initially till 2017 he practiced as a chartered accountant. He is a regular speaker in ICI and in many other forums. He specialized in direct tax. He is into litigation practice and also corporate tax and international taxation practice. With this brief introduction, I present CA Narendra Jain before you. Please join me to welcome. Friends, for everything, God's blessing is most important. Let us see the Almighty's blessing through lighting the lamp.
सुप्तेषु जागृति य एष सुप्तेषु जागृति कामं 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 कामुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तस्मिन् लोकः शिवः सर्वे तनूनात्यपि कश्चन एतद्द्वैता 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 एतद्द्वैता.
Friends, Almighty blessed us. Now I request Skuta Srinivas to make a brief overview of today's seminar.
members. I have my principal in the audience, Surya Prakash. Good morning to you, sir. The chairman of the Bangalore branch, the secretary of the Bangalore branch, the first speaker of today's session. Good morning to all three of you. So today we are having a one-day seminar on anti-money laundering laws and interplay with the Income Tax Act 1961. When we just discussed, myself and chairman immediately said, let us have this particular program as one-day seminar, because these are some of the topics which are the important one and which is every day. I think one of the other columns or one of the other part of the paper you will be reading about this money laundering as such. This is something which is happening in every day. We are coming across any situation, any case building to this money laundering act as such. In fact, when you go through the money laundering act session, you know almost 19 to 20 laws. Wherever you do some mistakes, directly it will be coming to this money laundering act. And we should be happy that two acts are away from this PMLA. That is, one is Income Tax Act and GST Act. So if there is any mistakes in under Income Tax Act and GST, if they also refer to PMLA, then I think more people will be inside than outside. So that is what things are going to happen. Definitely it's also some of the laws which we need to understand. Apart from this, we thought even some of the related provisions like section 68, 69 and all, whenever there is a search on these type of matters, definitely they will again relate to this Benami Act and then if required to PML Act. So we thought all those things are important, so we just put everything in a capsule and wanted to present this. And finally we also wanted to do this unregulated deposit scheme ordinance. You know that this ordinance came in February, but when we started designing this program, we thought this unregulated deposit scheme is not regulated, because that ordinance got elapsed. 6 months is the time for that ordinance and it got elapsed, so we thought we will not discuss that. But of late we saw there is a bill passed on that unregulated deposit scheme that has been proposed, still it has not been passed. Then we thought this section 270A, which is very important from this assessment year onwards. So whenever you go for assessments this month and next month, when we are doing this 17-18 assessments, this section 270A will be applicable. We thought let us discuss some of the provisions of this section 270A. When 270A was introduced in year 2016, the purpose was objectivity, certainty and clarity. So we have to wait and see whether the purpose will be solved. The time only will decide whether this all these purposes will be achieved. But what I would like to say, the objective of this one-day seminar is to see that, to share whatever knowledge we have with all the speakers, to all of you. As the chairman was saying, the registrations have crossed almost 200 people. People may come and join later, but I request all of you to be here till the end, so that we assure you that whatever the object of this seminar is to share the knowledge, certainly you will get that knowledge and with more clarity. That is what I would like to state here. So I request all of you to be there till the end, so that you can get more out of this particular seminar as such. So we will start this seminar with an overview on Benami Law, where Narendra Jain will be taking through this session. Then next session will be on PMLA, relevance for CAs. Mr. Bharat Lakshminarayana will be presenting that particular paper. Post lunch we have two sessions. One is on taxation of cash credits, unexplained investments, money, etc. by CA Sachin Kumar BP. The last session will be on section penalties under section 270A, which I will be handling. So I wish that anyway after we have signed, you will get the 6 hours CP credit. It's already gone. So all of you would have got 6 hours CP credit by now. So let us forget about CP credits now. So we have come here, whether for CP credits or not, we have come here. So having come here, like many students will join CA, I don't know why they will join. Where their father would have insisted, or their friend would have insisted, or on their own they would have come. Till they come, they don't know why they have come. But after coming, they are students of CA and they have to complete CA. So like that you have come here, whatever may be the reasons, forget that. And whatever the purpose is already been served, one purpose is already been served. The second purpose is to get the clarity on the provisions. I only hope that we will try our level best to bring before you whatever the little knowledge we have got. In fact, all the four of us went to Madurai for 2 days seminar on international taxation. There in Madurai branch, they were talking about these topics, like if somebody is doing these things, they would be interested to have a seminar as such. Maybe this, we went in May or June. From that day onwards, we decided let us start reading all these topics. Every Friday, we are all meeting, all the four of us are meeting in Narendra's office, and we are just preparing on this. So this is the first time we are presenting on these topics. So Bangalore branch, I should thank the Bangalore branch, the chairman and entire managing committee for giving us this opportunity. So if we do perform better here, we may be interested to go across other branches of southern India and share our knowledge. I thank you once again for coming here in the morning itself for the inauguration. I have seen all your faces. I'll remember at least till the end. I hope to see all of you till 5:30. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Srinivas, for a beautiful overview of today's program. Now I request the first technical section speaker, Narendra J, to enrich us on the Benami Law. Over to Narendra J.
To start with thanking Bangalore branch for giving us this opportunity to go through these new laws. Though the laws are old, the implications or their applicability has been increased in last few years. So it was an opportunity for us to learn this, implement this, and share on our knowledge on this. The first technical session, the overview is already given. There is interconnection between all these four sessions, and there is an interconnection of these with income tax also. So we'll try and see how we can understand this. The idea is to understand these laws so that we are better placed to advise our clients when this kind of a transactions comes to us, or when someone is trying to do a transaction which may fall within the ambit of Benami law, and we can caution them that such a kind of transaction is not permissible. The word Benami is of a Persian origin, though extensively used in Hindi. In the Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet, Juliet loves Romeo, who is of a rival family. So the Juliet says, what is in the name? The rose with any name will smell same. But the Benami law, what is without the name? But if something is without a name, there is a problem. What Shakespeare said may not be very apt in the context of Benami law. Though we would say that what is in a name, we look at the nature, character of a person. But here, what is important is the name. And if something is without the name, then it is Benami. The law of 1988, if you just go to the history of it, it all started with 1971 in a very small way into the Act of Income Tax Act by insertion of 281 capital, which is repealed in 2016. This act basically provided that certain information should be filed with Commissioner, nothing more than that. The real change started somewhere in May 1988, where the ordinance was brought in to curb the practice of Benami. And then the act came in 1988. This act was very small act with 9 sections compared to the 72 sections that we have today. This act was only with the 9 sections. Interestingly, in its implementation over more than 2 decades, no rules were provided. So when the later 2011, when the new bill was introduced, the questions were raised whether the old act is effective and why it has not been effective. The old act provided for compensation if there is a Benami property, that government can acquire that property and pay compensation. Compensation by word itself would mean that a fair compensation should be paid for any acquisition of the property that the government is acquiring. The whole purpose would have been lost. Plus, the rules in terms of how the compensation will be calculated, how the property would be acquired, was not laid down more than 2 decades also. Possibly the intention was never to implement that law. And because there were no rules laid down, in 28 years, not a single case of Benami transaction was from the government side. They did not even acquire a single property under the 1988 Act. That changed with the 2011 and it picked up with the 2016, the Amendment Act which was brought, which we called as Benami Transaction Prohibition Amendment Act 2016. This was the large, bigger change which was brought in. Then the rules were also prescribed from 1st November 2016. If you see old Act versus new Act, the name has changed a bit. Benami Transaction Prohibition Act, and it is now Prohibition of Benami Property Transaction Act. 9 section versus 72 section. The old law dealt with acquisition of property. That means the government will acquire a Benami property and give compensation for that. The new law deals with confiscation of property without any compensation. So if a property which falls within the definition of Benami property as defined in section 29 of the Act, in those cases there is a sufficient power with the government to attach the property, confiscate the property, and the property will be vested in the administrator as defined in the Act. So this is a very large change, and if you have seen papers in last 2 to 3 days, there is a news item which is running that 1,600 crores worth of property of a Tamil Nadu politician has been attached under the Benami property law. This is one of the latest transactions, but there are a lot of cases which are already going on under the Benami property law. There was no administration defined. That means under the old law, it was not stated who will attach the property, who is the officer, or who is going to take action. Under the new law, the structure has been clearly laid down, and along with the rules, it has been clearly notified which officer is going to do what. So as we go further, you will see the overview of the administration and what are the powers that the officers would have. Now, because the old law, there was no authorities under the old law defined, naturally who is going to implement it, and it was never implemented. But the new law says who are the authorities, and the income tax authorities itself, they formed something called as Benami Property Unit at various locations, BPU, which is called in short form, and various locations, and the authorities have been specified in these BPUs who will act as different authorities like initiating officers, adjudicating authorities, and approving authorities. The tribunal has been specified, special courts have been specified. All that has been done in new Act, which was completely missing in the old Act. Then old law provided for imprisonment of 3 years or fine or both. The new law varies it a bit, 1 into 7 years with 25% fine on the fair market value of the property. So along with imprisonment, there is also 25% of fine, and that fine is on the fair market value. Fair market value is again defined to the current value at what the property can be sold at the current transaction. So where Benami property transactions happened earlier, and if they are taking action currently, so along with the imprisonment, there is a chances that fair market 25% of FMV can be levied as a fine. These are the broad comparison between the old law and the new law. Old law and the new law. If you look at the first comparison itself, the 9 sections versus 72 sections. A question was raised in the parliament that why you are amending the 1988 Act. Instead, repeal that Act and bring a new law. Because the kind of change you have done, the old Act does not even survive. Hardly anything out of old Act survives. Out of those 9 sections also, a lot of sections have been modified. So effectively it is a completely new Act with new powers and new penalties and fines coming into 2016 Act. Why not leave that old law or repeal that old law and bring in the new law with the 2016 itself? The finance minister, the then finance minister, during the debate, Mr. Arun Jaitley replied to that repealing the old law would mean that we would be exempting all the transactions of Benami property which had happened from 1988 to 2016. So we do not want to let them go, and we want to apply the Benami law, current Benami law of 2016 to that old law, old transactions also, earlier transactions also. So he made a statement that is why we are not repealing the old law and bringing in 2016 as a new Act. Instead, we are making amendment to the existing Act. No doubt its whole soul is changing, its whole character is changing, but still we want to bring in the new law, amend the old law instead of bringing a new law. Now that itself is a debatable issue whether this kind of a law can have a retrospective effect. As we go forward, we will see. Because can we say that 2016, for example, the imprisonment of 7 years or a fine of 25% or procedure laid down for confiscation under the new law after 2016 can be applied to transactions which have been undertaken from 1988 to 2016. That itself is a debatable issue. The Rajasthan High Court has already said the new law will apply to transactions which are post 2016. It cannot be applied to prior 2016. Naturally, because Article 20, sub-Article 2 of Constitution will say that if you commit a crime, what is the fine or what is the penalty prescribed at that point of time only can be applied. You cannot make a retrospective effect. You cannot retrospectively amend a criminal law and say that you have done, say, a murder 5 years back and that time it was 7 years and now I make it 20 years. You cannot do that. Article 20 sub-Article 2 of Constitution would clearly not permit that kind of a retrospective amendment. So even if you look at the Benami Law, a lot of provisions are criminal in nature, like confiscation of property and imprisonment. This is a vested right in terms of property which the assessee has. It is his right, which is now being confiscated for certain defaults. Those defaults were not there in the 1988 Act. For example, if you see the Benami property definition of Benami, there are 4 items which are Benami property, which are Benami transactions, Benami property transactions. Out of 3 were never there in 1988 Act. For example, one of the Benami property items is it is in a fictitious name. Transaction is in a fictitious name. Now, I might have done a transaction in a fictitious name in 2013. The old law did not say it's a Benami transaction. The new law 2016 says it's a Benami transaction. Can the 2016 law be applied to 2013 when at that point of time when I entered the transaction in 2013 it was not a crime or it was not restricted, it was not regulated. So this is a major issue. As we go further, we will see how this interplay will work. And if the cases of the amendments which are coming in 2016 or the fines, penalties or the definition changes which are coming in 2016, my view would be that Finance Minister's statement may not be correct and those will have to be applied prospectively. But if they were already existing in 1988 Act, say an offence was already existing in 1988 Act, possibly for those cases we may apply the new procedure for doing the action. But I cannot be penalized more than what I would have penalized under the old law. So if under the old law I can be penalized for 3 years only, now you cannot penalize me for 7 years. In the old law there was no fine of 25% of FMP, that you cannot levy under the new law. So these nuances have to be kept in mind whenever a Benami property transaction is coming before you, that is it a transaction post 1st November 2016 or is it a transaction before 1st November 2016. Even in Karnataka High Court, certain writs are pending on this similar aspects that for old transactions you cannot apply the new law. And Rajasthan High Court has already held that the 2016, 1st November 2016, the law is prospective and cannot be applied to the old law. This is the primary thing that we need to keep it in mind when we are looking at the Benami Law. Now, before going further, let us understand the law's interplay with other things, other acts. Benami Law versus PMLA, whether there is a overlapping between these or these are different. Now, PMLA, as you will see in more detail in second session, is restricted for certain set of scheduled offences. The schedule of PMLA gives a list of offences. If the proceed of crime, or if the proceeds which are there from those offences, which we call as proceeds of crime under the PMLA, if it is arising out of those offences only, the PMLA will arise. Say for example, corruption is one of the scheduled offences in the PMLA. It is one of the scheduled offences in the PMLA. Undervaluation, evasion of custom duty is one of the offences under PMLA. Now, when that offence is done, only for those proceeds of crime the PMLA can be applied. Benami Law need not be for those scheduled offences. There could be some cases where someone to hide those illegal proceeds of crime can use and park the funds that in the name of some Benami Dar. Only to that extent the Benami Law and PMLA can have an overlapping effect, but otherwise both are independent. The scope of PMLA gets restricted to scheduled offence. If you have not done a scheduled offence, then it is not applicable. Now, I might have done a Benami transaction just to evade income tax. Now, that is not a scheduled offence under PMLA, so only the Benami Law will be applicable. Now, if you take another example, example that I have done an offense of corruption, and now to hide that ill-gotten funds or money, I am using a Benamidar to park that funds. Then the act of corruption is covered under Prevention of Corruption Act also. It is covered, the proceeds are covered under PMA law also, and the Benamidar's transaction is covered under the Benami law also. So depending on what is your offense, if it is a scheduled offense, then the law of PMLA and law of Benami will have simultaneous application, and the parallel proceedings under both the laws can go ahead. And if it is not, then there could be a parallel proceeding under the income tax and Benami law, or only under the Benami law, depending on what kind of transaction it is. The Income Tax Department, the CBDT, has also issued an SOP, Standard Operating Procedures, for the BPUs, the Benami property units, which are stationed at various locations, in terms of how they will approach the Benami law. As we proceed further, we will see some of the aspects which they have highlighted, and and what instructions they have given to their units, that if you get this kind of a transaction, how are you going to approach it. Okay. Then another important difference that we have to keep it in mind is the Benami versus sham transaction. Benami transaction is an actual transaction, but there is a Benamidar involved and you are hiding the beneficial owner. But sham transaction is something which you are actually doing, not doing a transaction, but trying to create documentation to do a transaction. So if it is a sham transaction, the courts will generally take a view that transaction never happened. But that is not a case with Benami. In a sham transaction, Benami law will not be applicable. If in a Benami law, where there is a Benamidar who knows that there is a transaction of this nature, in those cases Benami law will be applicable. Again, when we see the definition, this will be more clear as we proceed further. Okay. Now, what is a Benami transaction? These are two to three terms that we have to clearly understand to understand the implications under this law. Benami transaction is a transaction or arrangement whereby the identity of real owner is referred as beneficial owner. We will refer that throughout this session of property is concealed by showing someone else, Benamidar, as the owner of the record. So actually the benefit is, say for Mr. X, he is the real owner, but the property is registered in the name of A. And there is never an intention that A be the real owner or enjoy the fruits of the property. The fruits of the property will always be enjoyed by X, who is the real owner. So A is the Benamidar and X is the real owner. So there has to be these two persons for the transaction to be a Benami transaction. Okay. Now the preamble of the statute says an act to prohibit Benami transaction and right to recover the property held Benami and for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Now this, if you look at the preamble, the intention is very clear that we want to prohibit Benami transactions. And if there is a Benami transaction, we want to recover the property. That is a very clear intention laid out in the preamble of the act. Two things, and entire act revolves around these two things. Prohibit a Benami transaction, if it is a Benami transaction, following with the definition of section 2 subsection 9, prohibit it and recover the property. So these are the two main themes through and through the 72 sections of the act, and the entire the law tries to implement these two objectives: prohibit a Benami transaction and recover the property. Now this is subsection section 1, which says that it may be called as Benami property transaction. It extends to in whole of India except state of Jammu and Kashmir. The application of this law to Jammu and Kashmir will all depend on what interpretation is given to Article 317. It is outside today's scope, we will discuss it sometime later. And the third bullet, what you see, the bottommost bullet, section 358 shall come into force at once, and the remaining provisions of this act shall deem to have come into force on 19th May 1988. If you go back here to the history, the ordinance in 1988 came in 19th May. It came as an ordinance. So they started taking action under the ordinance itself, though there were no real actions, but the intention was to start taking actions from the May 1988 itself. The act came in somewhere in the 5th September 1988. So there was a gap between the ordinance and the actual act coming into picture. Now this time gap they wanted to bridge in the old Act, 1988 Act. So therefore, they said that 358, which dealt with prohibition, which dealt with penalty, those will be from the date of the new Act, which is September 1988, and other provisions will be applicable from 1988. This section remains as it is in the new 2016 Act also. So if you read the 2016 Act, it will has it given indication that even in the 2016 Act, they want to make sections 358 prospective and all other sections as retrospective. That again, as I said, retrospectivity will have to be read along with the kind of offences it was, and read Article 26, Article 2 of the Constitution. Along with that, you will have to see which provision can be retrospectively applied from 1988 and which provision can be prospectively applied from 1st November 2016. Now, what is a Benami property? Benami property means property which is subject matter of a Benami transaction. Then 29 defines Benami transaction, we will come to that. So, if a transaction is a Benami transaction, the property which is involved in a Benami transaction becomes Benami property. And look at the later part, and also includes proceeds from such property. Now, proceeds from such property is very wide term. For example, if there is an immovable property which is treated as Benami property and the transaction is coming within the ambit of section 2 subsection 9 of the Act, then the rental income which comes from, say, the Benami Law, from that rental property, Benami property, or say sale proceeds which come from that Benami property, could also be captured within the meaning of Benami property, because the term also includes property of such proceeds of from such property. That is very important. Then we can just go to the property definition. Property means asset of any kind. This is very similar to the definition of capital asset which we have in income tax. Property of any description, asset of any kind, where it is already held that that itself is very wide. And it further says whether movable or immovable, tangible or intangible. So property can be of any kind, it could be movable, immovable. So it is not restricted to immovable properties only. That's another general understanding that Benami Law will apply to in the immovable properties. That is not to say, that is not the case. So if I buy a car in the name of some Mr. A who has no wherewithal to buy, and I am funding that and it is falling within the meaning of Benami transaction, then there is a problem. Tangible or intangible, corporeal or incorporeal, includes any right, interest or legal document or instrument evidencing title to or interest in a property. So even interest in a property is captured, and where the property is capable of conversion into some other form, so jewelry converted into cash, then the property in the converted form and includes proceeds from such property. So again, the definition here is very wide. First, it says property of any kind, then movable, immovable, tangible, intangible, corporeal, incorporeal, then interest in these properties, and proceeds. If it is converted, then the converted proceeds and proceeds which are coming. So that captured the definition of property very wide. Hardly anything will go out of this definition. Any kind of asset that we have, it will be cash, jewelry, money, bullion, will naturally fall within the definition of property. Now let's look at the important definition, and this is where we try to spend some time to understand that what is a Benami transaction. First we'll go through the section, then come back and see each of the clauses in this section. So Benami transaction means, so it's an exhaustive definition. That means it will have to fall in one of the four items which are listed, one of the four clauses which are listed in 2.9. A transaction or an arrangement. Transaction or an arrangement where the property is transferred or is held by a person. So property is transferred or held by a person, and consideration for such property has been provided or paid by another person. So this is a primary condition. The property is held by some Mr. X, and consideration for that property is paid by Mr. A. So these are two different persons. Now if you see the main limit itself, where the property is transferred or held, that means it should be an actual transaction. It should be an actual transaction. And so cumulative condition going forward. So the first limit gives us two broad parameters, where a property is held by Mr. X, one person, and the consideration is given by A, so another person. Now the person who is holding the property, which is X in our example, is the Benamidar, and person who gives the consideration is the beneficial owner. This is the meaning we will ascribe as we go further to all our examples. and the property is held for the immediate or future benefit, direct or indirect, of a person who has provided the consideration. This is the most critical part of the definition. So if you look at both the clauses, then there are three broad tests. One is there is property which is held or transferred to Benami Law. The consideration is provided by the beneficial owner or the real owner, and the property is held for whose benefit? For the benefit of the real owner, for the beneficial owner, and not for the benefit of the Benami Law. It should be held for the benefit of real owner. Now this is very critical test. Whenever we are looking at any of the examples, suppose today questions will come, if I found a cash during the course of a search, can it be a Benami transaction? If there is a property document which is unaccounted, can it be a Benami transaction? So when I am taking these transactions, fictitious purchases, whether I can apply it a Benami transaction, or with property purchased between the family members, how I am going to look at those transactions. So these are the three fundamental tests that we have to apply in all the cases and see whether it satisfies these cumulative tests, and if so, then it becomes a Benami transaction, and property involved in this Benami transaction will become a Benami property which can be confiscated under this law. Now the first limb, clause A here, clause A is, clauses A and B are the cumulative conditions. Now just look at the exception, because the underlying word, except when the property is held back. So if I can demonstrate, there are totally 4 exceptions, 1, 2, 3, 4, despite the primary conditions being satisfied of a Benami Law, beneficial owner and benefit, assuming these 3 conditions are satisfied, if I can demonstrate that my case falls in these 4 exceptions, then it is not a Benami transaction. Now first exception is a Karta or a member of HUF has the case may be, and property is held for his benefit or benefit of other members in the family, and consideration for such property has been provided or paid out of known sources of the HUF. This is again a critical word used here, known sources of HUF. This is one exception. Second exception is person standing in fiduciary capacity for the benefit of another person towards whom he stands in such capacity, includes trustee, executor, partner, director of a company, depository, etc. Third exception is a person being an individual in the name of his spouse or in the name of child. Here they have not used the word minor child, so here the word child of such individual, and consideration of such property is provided by the known sources of individual. Fourth, a person in the name of any person, property is held by any person in the name of his brother or sister or linear ascendant or descendant, where the name of brother or sister, linear ascendant or descendant, and the individual appear in joint owner. Let's see the difference between 3 and 4, where the property is in the name of wife or wife or child, the condition of joint ownership is not there. But where the property is taken, say in the name of brother, the condition of joint ownership is there. So if it is not falling here, then there could be some difficulty. And the joint owner in any document, the consideration such property has been provided or paid out of known sources of an individual. Now these are the 4 exceptions to clause A. Now we have another 3 clauses which also deal a transaction to be Benami transaction. These 4 exceptions do not apply to B, C, D. The 4 exceptions. So if I am saying that I purchased a property in the name of wife, I may take an exception of clause 3. But if the transaction falls in A, if the transaction falls in B, C, D, then the exceptions are not applicable. So what are B, C, D? The transaction or arrangement in respect of a property carried out or made in a fictitious name. So it is in a fictitious name. C, a transaction or an arrangement in respect of a property where the owner of the property is not aware or denies knowledge of such ownership. A transaction or an arrangement in respect of property where the person providing the consideration is not traceable and is fictitious. C talks of Benami Law not being aware of a transaction. D talks of the beneficiary owner not being traceable or being fictitious. Okay, and there is an explanation. I will come to explanation a little later. First let us now go back to this. So first we will look at clause A, then try to take some examples to understand where it will fit. For example, demonetization cases. We have today many cases where it is coming out that in Jan Dhan accounts the cash is deposited by some XYZ, right? Now will it be a Benami transaction? Suppose there is a farmer or a landless laborer or a small time laborer, and his account 1 crore rupees deposited, and case is picked up today for income tax scrutiny, where this question is asked and he denies the knowledge, I don't know who has deposited in my account. What will be the consequences? It's not a Benami transaction. Can this fit in transaction C? A transaction or an arrangement in respect of a property where the owner of the property is not aware of or denies the knowledge of such ownership. Is not aware of or denies the knowledge of such ownership. So it is in the bank account of a landless laborer. And he says, I don't know how this 1 crore has been deposited in my account. Can the government today attach that bank account and take away 1 crore rupees? Right? So here the owner of the bank account is making a statement, I don't have any knowledge of this 1 crore, I deny having a knowledge of this 1 crore. Okay? Just change this example and look at what could be the implication. The landless laborer says that I was given this cash of 1 crore by Mr. A and I deposited. And Mr. A is not traceable now. Some Mr. A, Mr. India, is invisible. Will it become Benami? Will it fit in clause D? A transaction or an arrangement in respect of a property where a person providing the consideration, who has provided a consideration, some Mr. A, some XYZ, Mr. India has provided a consideration, and he is not either traceable or he is fictitious. Suppose today I make an entry in my books of account, cash credits. Some man has given me loan, Mr. A, Mr. B has given me loan, and that Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C is not in existence. Will it become a Benami transaction? Can we say that clause B, which says a transaction or arrangement in respect of a property carried out in a fictitious name, a transaction which is carried out in a fictitious name. Now I am saying the person who's given me loan they are not traceable. Either they are a fictitious person, we don't know where it is, a notice is served under 133(6) of the Income Tax Act and the address is not found, and whether that can be a Benami transactions. So in our real life situations, please note that for these three, the exceptions of clause A are not applicable. Okay, when we go back to clause A and try to connect these also, it will be there. Take another example. A search is done at a premises of an, say, government officer, and a huge amount of cash and jewelry is found. Now, the officer says, jewelry belongs to my wife. Right? And the CBI or whoever asks the wife, have you knowledge of any jewelry? Now she says, I don't know which this jewelry is. What is this jewelry all about? I don't know. Can you take recourse to clause 2 exception, which says that you can, clause A, 3 exception, exception number 3, that the property is in the name of spouse. Or it will fall in C, clause C, capital C, which says that if the owner claims that I am not aware of a transaction, then it is clause C, and that exception doesn't apply to this clause C. Now, if it is falling in these clauses B, C, D, why I want to highlight this is if it is falling in clauses B, C, D, and if anyone makes a statement that I am not aware or the person is fictitious, in those cases, those exception of clause A will not be applicable. Suppose the wife is a partner, there is a reported decision. Wife was a partner in a firm. Search was conducted under 132 of Income Tax Act. Wife makes a statement, I don't know which firm, what partner. Okay, so it is important that you disclose everything to spouse, otherwise there is risk of Benami. It is vice versa also. So, depends on the statement which is given. In that particular case, wife made a statement, I am aware that I am a partner in a firm, I don't know anything else. So whether that is denying the knowledge or that is denying the knowledge of certain aspects and there is a knowledge about a transaction. The court took a view that yes, the income has been included in her return, she has a knowledge that she is a partner in a firm, so they accepted the transaction is not falling within the ambit of Benami transaction, but these statements could be twisted or it could be very close to creating problems in this clause C, where someone in the family member says that I don't know about the transaction and the document or the asset is in that particular person's name. So it's very important to keep these things in mind. Let's go back to the first clause. So as I said, there are three conditions here which we have to see, that there is a Benami Law, there is a beneficial owner, and the asset is for the benefit of beneficial owner, not the Benami Law. Right? So these are the three important conditions. If these conditions are satisfied, then it can be treated that the transaction is a Benami transaction. Now look at this, the property is transferred or held. This is understandable because transfer means actual transfer of a property. Held means he is having the possession of that property, okay, by a person who is a Benami. The consideration for such property has been provided or paid by another person. The consideration for such property has been provided or paid by another person. Now, what would this phrase mean? Consideration paid or provided by another person. Suppose the person, I give a loan to my friend and he purchases the property. Will it become a Benami transaction? Can you say consideration is provided by me to my friend or me to directly to that seller, sorry. What if I directly pay to seller? In a lot of transactions there could be tripartite agreements between the builders, banks and other things and the actual buyer, so seller, buyer and third party. So will those kind of transaction, can you say what do you mean by the phrase consideration for such property has been provided or paid by another person? So if a person organizes funds within his family members, friends, either they pay to him and he pays it to the seller, or the friends and family directly pay to the seller. Is there a possibility of these kind of a transaction getting captured within the meaning of Benami transaction? Because these are very regular and routine transactions for us.
There's still an obligation to repay.
There is an obligation to repay. What if it is within a family and there is no obligation to repay and there is no gift deed also? Let's assume that kind of a situation also, that someone has not done a gift, the loan is given and the facts show that the loan has never been repaid. Let's assume that kind of a situation. When it is repaid, it becomes more stronger. It becomes more stronger because there is a case of Benami Appellate Tribunal also. An advance was received by assessee, ISKCON tiles, from a person, 75 lakh rupees. It came to the knowledge, the person who gave the advance is only a Hawala operator, an entry operator. Hawala entry operator. The Benami transaction law was applied to this ISKCON tiles who had received this 75 lakhs and his bank account was attached saying that you are receiving this 75 lakhs and that person, Hawala entry operator, is not existence, he is a fictitious person, and this 75 lakhs becomes your property. And therefore, by applying Benami law, I will recover this 75 lakhs by attaching your bank account. That case, the assessee had paid back 75 lakhs and therefore he was able to demonstrate that amount I have paid back. He might be an entry operator, but I have actually paid back the 75 lakhs. Therefore, the court took a view, the tribunal took a view rather, that this is not a Benami transactions. There are few reported decisions, not many. There is another reported decision of a transaction in Bangalore, certain medical college at the time of demonetization. Roughly around 8 crores of cash were distributed to around 49 employees, and those employees deposited that cash in the bank account, their bank accounts. A raid was done at the premises of that medical college where this list of 49 employees was recovered. The college made a statement that the particular institute made a statement that this is our money, our income, we will offer it to tax and pay the tax on this under that time of IDS scheme, PMKGY, whatever the scheme was there, and they made a disclosure under that scheme. But the tax department proceeded against those 49 persons and said that this is Benami transaction, we will attach your bank accounts and recover cash whatever you had got. These persons, these employees of this particular institute made a statement that this was advance salary we received. And this is, they were able to demonstrate, no doubt all this would have been done post the raid, but they were able to demonstrate that the amount is set off against the subsequent salaries. And only small amount is left out of that advance which is given. So based on the documentation which was either created or existence, whatever it was, the tribunal took a view that look, the amount has been given back. And it was given as advance salary. Therefore, we accept that it is not a Benami transaction, and the applicability of Benami law was quashed in that particular case. So you can just see that kind of transactions that are coming and how the tax department is trying to apply this law in every search case or every different kind of cases what are there and apply the particular law. Whether it is entry operator cases, all entry cases, bogus purchase cases. So bogus purchase, the other party may be fictitious, not in existence, or just maybe an entry operator. So they are trying to use this law not just deny you deduction of an expenditure or tax and income, but also apply this law and try to recover that particular value of transaction. Suppose it's 1 crore of purchase, they are saying we will try to recover 1 crore of cash applying this particular law. All this is at nascent stage and the law will evolve and develop over this, but we need to be aware what could be the circumstances when that can fall in Benami transaction or it can be outside Benami transaction. Now coming back to this consideration paid or provided, that where a loan is given, there is a Supreme Court decision under the 1988 Act which very clearly said that in those cases the for SSC 243 very clearly said that the assessee can take loan from his friends and families and can make good the consideration what he is paying. That will not be treated as consideration paid or provided by the beneficial owner or real owner. Second important thing, though this clause B which is there in 2016 Act was not there in 1988 Act, that it should be for immediate or future benefit of whom? Of the real owner or the person who is providing a consideration. Suppose we take an example that I am purchasing a property and my brother pays the consideration either directly to the seller or he pays as a loan to me and I pay as a seller. When he pays loan to me, it is much safer transaction. There is not much of a problem in that. When he pays directly to the seller, then there is a doubt arising because the consideration is directly paid. So he has provided the consideration. But the second condition says that the benefit of property should rest with whom? In this example which I am giving, if I am using the property for my residency and not my brother, then it is for whose benefit? It is for my benefit. It is not for the benefit of the real owner who provided the consideration or the person who provided the consideration. So in a Benami transaction, this test of benefit is very critical and this has to be kept in mind. So in all cases where loans are given, the question is whose benefit? Suppose a bank gives a loan. Bank might have provided a consideration. Just providing consideration is not sufficient. Is it a case where the bank will benefit from the property or I will benefit from the property? It is I who will benefit from the property, and bank providing the consideration is no doubt one of the factors of Benami, but it doesn't satisfy the other test of a Benami transaction, and therefore such transactions will be outside the Benami property law. This condition of benefit, we need to ask in every transaction where a question raised these three conditions. There is a Benamidar, there is a beneficial owner, and there is a benefit. That to who is getting the benefit? Is the beneficial owner getting the benefit or the Benamidar, who is the owner of whose name is the legal owner of the property getting the benefit? Where I am able to demonstrate that real beneficial owner who provided the consideration is not getting benefit and can be out of the main definition of Benami property under 29 itself. Next is the exceptions. In the exceptions are straightforward and easy to understand that the property is held by Karta or member of HUF. It should be either Karta or member of the HUF, and the source for that and it is held for the benefit of the family, joint family, HUF family, and the consideration should have been provided out of known sources of HUF. Now what do you mean by known sources of HUF? Because same clause is used in the subsequent limbs also, that the consideration should be from known sources of HUF. What do you mean by known sources of HUF? Can we draw the analogy of 68 or other provisions in the Income Tax Act and say what is a source, known source here? Will known source mean known source of income and my only income, or it could be any source where I can demonstrate from where the funds are from? So for example, my source, if I am purchasing a property of 1 crore rupees, my source of income is 50 lakh rupees, which is out of my capital bills, savings, etc. and 50 lakhs is out of loan taken from 10 persons. Now, if I demonstrate that those 10 persons are genuine, the transaction is genuine, they are credible persons, they are existing persons, and they have capacity to lend, which is a test under 68. Now, if I demonstrate then whether that 50 lakhs of loan will become my known sources, here they are not used the word known sources of income, they are so known sources of funds. So the known sources of funds will also include the loan funds which the assessee can take from third parties. But the whole point is we have to apply our CMI and say that how did the money come and from what is the source of the funds that the assessee is saying. And once that is explained, then this clause, you can take the benefit of these clauses. This known sources is applicable in the subsequent clause 3 and clause 4 also. Clause 3 says it can be in the name of spouse or child. Child is not defined in Benami law. For that definition, you go back to the Income Tax Act 215B, because Section 231 of Benami law says whatever is not defined in the Benami law, and they have listed on 6 to 7 acts, if the definition is provided in those acts, then you go to those acts and apply those definitions, and that definition will be applicable to the Benami law also. Income tax is one of those laws, and various other laws, security law, CBDT law has been prescribed. So 231 takes us to the other act. So the child has defined in 215E will be applicable, spouse is there. So, and again the funds should be out of known source of income. Look at clause 4. Clause 4 is slightly differently worded. It says the person in the name of his brother or sister, linear ascendant or descendant. So till here it is fine. Brother and sister, no cousins covered, no sister-in-law covered, all that are out. Where a name of brother, sister, linear ascendant appear as a joint owner. So here, if I am paying a consideration for a property and for my brother, then I and my brother will have to be a joint owner of the property. If I want to take benefit of exception 4, much better way of this would be give a loan to him and he pays to the seller. That would be much cleaner way of saying that this is how we have done the transaction. Instead, you paying the entire consideration and his name, only property being his name and you not being a joint owner. So just one can take care of that by trying to see that how the transaction is being taken. Because in case of brother, sister, linear ascendant, descendant, the expectation is the person who is providing the consideration, individual, also is the joint owner of the property. Why distinction is made between 3 and 4 is not very clear. We do not know why this distinction is made. Possibly the framers of the law believe in nuclear families and not joint families. So therefore they have put the condition in 4 and not in 3. The other...
Sorry, I don't know whether it's a grammatical error. So if the property is in the name of the husband, the wife being the beneficial owner, so would it still fall within clause 3? Because it says the name of his spouse actually. Or can we take protection under the general clauses act?
We'll have to take protection under the general clauses. They use his only. They use his or her.
No, but other places it says his, her. Normally it is used as his.
Normally used as his. Even in
the spouse. In some cases it uses the spouse, so that's pretty good.
64 clubbing provision uses the spouse. Possibly they had more belief in 377. The exception 2 is again straightforward, fiduciary capacity, where the like a trustee and beneficiary of a trust, and they have covered various other things like partner, director of a company. So consideration is provided by the company, asset is in the name of a director. So that may not be possible because in the Companies Act there is a restriction, the asset needs to be in the name of the company. But in case of partnership, it could be that kind of situation where the name of partner is entered saying to register of members and consideration is provided by the firm. So it could still get in the exception, and that would not trigger the Benami property law. B, as we said, we have seen this fictitious name, so that means there is no person by that name and the transaction is being undertaken in that name. Then C, as we discussed, denies the knowledge or denies the knowledge of a transaction or ownership. And D, where the person who is given the consideration is not traceable or fictitious. We come to the explanation. Now this explanation is applicable to the entire 4 clauses. And this what they want to cover is a what we call as GPA kind of transactions, falling within 53A of the Transfer of Property Act. Those transactions they want to exclude from the ambit of Benami property, Benami law. So here, for the removal of doubts, it is hereby declared that Benami transaction not include any transaction involving allowing the possession of any property to be taken or retained in part performance as covered under 53A, and there are 3 conditions. The consideration of such property has been provided by a person to whom possession of the property has been allowed, but the person who has granted possession thereof continues to hold ownership. So possession is with the person who has given the consideration, but the ownership rests with the actual owner. Stamp duty has been paid and the contract is registered. So basically the idea was to cover the GPA kind of transactions, and those transactions, as the finance minister made a statement in the parliament, that those kind of transactions will fall in this exception and they will not be covered. They got the law commission report basically refers to transactions generally happening GPA Delhi, and they try to cover that in this. So here what would happen is, by GPA you might have given the possession to him, but you are the real owner and he has provided the consideration. So very clearly this would fall in this particular explanation and it would be out. Now before we proceed further, one or two issues which we come up is, as I said, with the retrospectivity. If you see clauses 2.9 definition, clause A was very similar to old definition of Benami transaction, but clauses B, C, D are new insertions. So if a transaction falls in B, C, D and someone says that it is a Benami transaction by virtue of clauses B, C, D, in my opinion, if the transaction is prior to 2016, then this new law cannot be applied to it. If transaction is post 2016, then the new law will be applicable. Because, as I said, being a criminal law and having a criminal implication, you cannot apply with the law with the retrospectivity, though their intention is to apply that. So, if a transaction is a Benami transaction which is getting covered in clause A, because that the same definition was there in the 1988 Act also, but clauses B, C, D being a new insertion cannot naturally have a retrospective effect, and they will have to be given prospective effect. But once a transaction is a Benami transaction, what are the implications? What are the implications? The law section 3 onwards gives the implication for this. The first thing is, it says no person shall enter into any Benami transaction. This is a clear-cut prohibition that no person shall enter into a Benami transaction. You cannot enter into a Benami transaction. Then it says whoever enters into any Benami transaction shall be punishable with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 3 years with fine or with both. Now this is under the 1988 Act, and what is relevant for current transaction is the subsection 3.3.3. Whoever enters into a Benami transaction on or after the date of commencement of Benami transaction 2016 Act shall, notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 2, be punishable in accordance with the provisions of contained in chapter 7. We will go to those in a while. So, transaction prior to 2016, 3.2 will be applicable, where the imprisonment is 3 years. In 3.3, and in the old law, there was no quantum of fine prescribed. So they said 3 years plus fine or both, but how do you quantify the fine was never prescribed. So really you can collect the fine for all transaction is a debatable and a doubtful case. You cannot really do that. Coming to subsection 3, very clearly, section 53 onwards, it very clearly says what will be the imprisonment and what will be the fine. So 2016 transaction post 2016 will fall in subsection 3, and before that will fall in subsection 2. And subsection 1 clearly prohibits any transaction that you can do. Any prosecution which is initiated under this law has to be with the previous approval of competent authority, which is CIT, DIT, PCIT and PDIT. As I said, there is a BPU, Benami Property Unit, where various officers are stationed or they are there, and in that unit the approval will have to be taken by the person in charge or of that particular range by CIT, DIT, PCIT or PDIT. So prosecution cannot be initiated without the approval of competent authority. 2019 Finance Act made a small amendment. Earlier, every prosecution of Benami law, the approval had to be given by the CBDT. They made in 2019, they found it cumbersome possibly, and they said that now onwards, if an approval has to be taken, in those cases the approval can be given by the CIT, etc. And for every cases you need not go to CBDT to take the approval. This is an amendment which has happened by Finance Act 2019, Second Finance Act of 2019. Okay. What are the implications? What are the other implications? First, as I said, you cannot enter into a transaction. Second, can a real owner file a case to recover the Benami property from the Benamidar. Now the property is situated or property is in the possession and the legal ownership as per the documents is with the Benamidar. Can the real owner who has provided the consideration in a Benami transaction can file a suit to claim that property from the Benamidar? The law very clearly bars this in section 4. It says no suit, claim or action to enforce any property rights by a real owner against the Benamidar on any other person. So whatever are your property rights, what the real owner thought he has, he cannot enforce it. He cannot get that property back. Next condition. Benami property, next implication, Benami property is liable to be confiscated by central government. Such property shall vest in central government free of all encumbrances and no compensation will be paid either to Benamidar or to the real owner. So once it falls within the definition of Benami transaction, the vesting of that property by the process of law will happen and the property will vest in the central government and the central government gets the full ownership of that property which it can use it for its purpose or sell it further, it can do it. And no compensation will be paid to the real owner or to the Benamidar. Benamidar cannot retransfer the Benami property to the beneficial owner or any person acting in his behalf. So they are barred filing of a suit by the real owner against the Benamidar. They have specifically barred that the Benamidar cannot retransfer the property to the real owner or the beneficial owner. He also cannot do. And if it does, such transaction becomes null and void. If done, such transaction is deemed to be null and void. But if you had made a disclosure under IDS of 2016, then this retransfer could have been done. There's a specific window given in IDS in November when the scheme had come, that if it is Benami property and if you are making a disclosure under IDS 2016, then the Benamidar can retransfer the property to real owner and there would have been no implication for this. Let's look at the penalties. Then we'll look at some more transactions to understand how this has been implemented, or at least what is the board's view on the Benami transaction. If Benami transaction is, now this is very interestingly worded, this is section 53 which provides for penalty for Benami transaction. This section 53 provides for penalty of Benami transactions. Okay, so as we saw in 3.3, it refers back to chapter 7. Now chapter 7 is this 53, 54 and 54 capital A which has been inserted by 2019 Finance Act. Now 53 says, if Benami transaction is in order to defeat provisions of any law or avoid payment of statutory dues or avoid payment to creditors. So they have given certain conditions here. So they say if a Benami transaction is in order to defeat provisions of law or avoid payment of statutory dues or avoid payment to creditors, beneficial owner, Benamidar or any person who abates or induces any person to enter into a transaction shall be guilty of an offence of Benami transaction. And once he is guilty of an offence of Benami transaction, the imprisonment is rigorous imprisonment for not less than 1 year, which can stretch up to 7 years, and fine is 25% of FMV of the Benami property. So this is section 53. Now, the issue that arises, let's say there is a Benami transaction. Okay, there is an actual Benami transaction. If you look at 53, if it is a Benami transaction, there are two implications. One is confiscation by the central government and vesting of the property in the central government. Second is imprisonment. These are two implications of a Benami transaction. For vesting of a property in the central government, there is no conditions. One, it is a Benami transaction, vesting is automatically there by the process of law. No doubt they will have to follow the procedure laid down under the law, but the confiscation and vesting is by virtue, once it is a Benami transaction and they issue a notice, the procedure will start. For imprisonment, interestingly, they have used the words, if a Benami transaction is in order to defeat any provision of a law, or avoid payment of a statutory dues, or to avoid payment to creditors. These are three situations they have stated in section 53, and if this be so, then beneficial owner, Benamidar, or any person who abates for the transaction become liable for imprisonment. What if I am able to demonstrate that I did a Benami transaction not to defeat a provision of a law, not to avoid payment payment of a law, payment of statutory dues, and not to avoid payment to creditors. If I demonstrate this, can I say the provision related to imprisonment are not applicable? So for example, there is a transaction which I am able to demonstrate that it doesn't defeat any provision of a law. It is actually earned through business and the tax suffered money, but the property is purchased in name of some other person. I am not avoiding payment of statutory dues like taxes and other things also, and I have no loans to defraud the creditors also. So if I am able to demonstrate, in my personal view, if these conditions are satisfied, because the way they have worded the section, they have said if there is a defeat of provision of a law, avoid payment of statutory dues or defraud the creditors, only in then those cases only the imprisonment provision will be there. If you are able to demonstrate in any given case that these conditions are not satisfied, we should be able to argue that the provision related to imprisonment are not applicable. No doubt confiscation of the property and vesting of property in the central government may be applicable, but the imprisonment and 25% fine of fair market value. As I said, fair market value is the current value, and which could be very high if the transaction has happened earlier. The fair market value could be very high. First of all, they have taken the property, then you will have to go for a loan to pay that 25% fine. Right? So but the way section 53 is worded, I would feel that if you are able to demonstrate that these conditions are not satisfied, the imprisonment provisions of section 53 should not be applicable in that particular case. No doubt, avoid payment of statutory dues is very wide. If you are avoiding income tax also or any other related provision, GST also, it could be covered in that ambit, but you have to see in each case whether you can demonstrate that I have not avoided payment of taxes or payment of statutory dues, and therefore I am out of section 53. This is one possible interpretation of section 53. Next is where you give false information or document, section 54. It says vigorous imprisonment of not less than 6 months up to 5 years and fine of 10% of fair market value of a property. So where you have given a false information or document. 54 capital A has been inserted by 2019 Finance Act, which provides a penalty of 25,000 rupees for non-compliance with summons under section 19 and failure to furnish information under 21. Section 19 is a power given to the authorities to issue summons and for appearance and etc. Production of books of accounts, documents, appearance, and 21 is calling for information. If you just relate to the income tax, section 19 is like 131 and 21 is like 142 of income tax where you call the information. So if if the notice is issued under these sections or summons are issued under these sections and you do not cooperate with the authorities, then 25,000 will be the fine for non-compliance. 25,000 will be the fine for non-compliance. So this is a broad outline of the law. We'll come to the procedure. We have little time left, so I will just give an overview of the procedure. But it's also important to know the existing, the way the authorities are implementing law. So they have issued an SOP where they have given the guidance to the BPUs, the Benami property units, which are formed at various locations, and those units are asked to implement this law. And if you see the authorities, the initiating officer is nothing but the ACIT, DCIT of the income tax officer. Some of the officers have been posted to that particular BPU. Approving authority is the additional commissioner or joint commissioner as defined in the income tax act. They become for the purpose of the Benami law also. Administrator is the ITO. The work of administrator is the administrating the property. It is like a TRO who recovers the taxes. And adjudicating authority is a range, similar to CIT. Like we have the appeal forums of DRP and CIT. It is very similar that adjudicating authority is the CIT here. The SOP gives a guidance to all of them, how the reference will be made to one by one officer, what information is to be collected and all that. It also gives certain very interesting interplay between the income tax law and the Benami law. For example, if there is a property where the source is unexplained of an asset and property is held to properties in the name of Benami card. Source is unexplained and property is in the name of Benami card. So property is purchased in the name of say Mr. X, and how the source of funds came in the hands of X, it is not clear. Okay. So now what will be the implication? First is, how will you tax this? Suppose there is a 1 crore of property. How will you tax this 1 crore rupees? Will you tax in the hands of Benami Law or will you tax in the hands of real owner? Now we know this person. So Mr. X is Benami Law, A is real owner, and we know A gave funds to purchase this property, and this funds of 1 crore are unexplained. And the property is name of Mr. X. Now if an income tax assessment has to be done, will it be done in the hands of Mr. X, Mr. A, and to whom the Benami property law will be made applicable? Yeah? Should you make the assessment under 68 for unexplained, 69A for property, unexplained source of property, unexplained property, in the hands of real owner or Benami Law? Real owner. The SOP says you make substantive addition in the hands of real owner and protective addition in the hands of Benami Law. Because if you going forward, it is demonstrated that it is not a Benami transaction, then if you don't assess the Benami Law, there is a chance that if you assess only the real owner, he will say it is a property of Benami Law. If you assess only the Benami Law, we will take an argument that it is a property of real owner. So they have said make a substantive addition in the hands of real owner and protective additions in the hands of Benami Law. And given that it is a Benami transaction, confiscate the property under the Benami tax laws. Look at these implications. Property of 1 crore is gone. What is the tax for unexplained cases? 78%, right? So 78% will be the tax liability plus 25% fine under the Benami law. So the property of 1 crore is gone. There could be additional liability along with interest and all. If you calculate it, it would go much higher than 200 times of the value of property. Okay. So if the source is unexplained. Second example they give, if source is explained and property is in Benami Law, which will be very rare cases. If source is explained, why will I purchase property in the hands of Benami Law? Right? If I know that this is out of my source and I have offered that income in my hands, I will naturally not purchase in the hands of Benami Law. But even otherwise, they give an example of this kind also, that if the source is explained, do not take any action under the income tax law, but apply Benami property law for the Benami Law. There you apply for the, anyway, it goes for both. There is no specific thing. I mean, both of them will have the charge of 53 and imprisonment and fine. Third kind of a situation where property owner denies that he has knowledge of property. These demonetization cases where cash is deposited in Jandan accounts, the person in whose account this cash is deposited really doesn't know from where the credit in his bank account came. Now, how will the assessment be done in these cases? Now, there could be two situations here. One, the cash is deposited. Who deposited the cash, the department is able to find out through their means. Second, they are not able to find out who deposited the cash. Now, if they are able to find out who deposited the cash, then the person in whose name this Jandan account is there, say X, and we know that A has deposited in the X account. The transaction becomes Benami transaction as per the SOP, and make a substantive addition in the hands of A, because A was the real owner who deposited the cash, and make protective addition in the hands of X, who is a Benami. Second situation where you really don't know who deposited the cash. Okay, we don't know who A is. Someone has given credit in the bank account of the X, who is Benami, and he denies knowledge. Now, how will you do the assessment here? The SOP says here you make addition in the hands of the Benami itself, because you really don't know who is the real owner. Now, look at this person in whose account this Jandan account money has come, and if it is withdrawn also, there is a further challenges, because they will attach this bank account, withdraw, it becomes a Benami property. Say 1 crore is deposited, 1 crore is confiscated, and tax liability is fastened on this person who is having this Jandan account, and he really would have no means to pay those taxes, fines, etc. So that would be a case where the person who has deposited the cash is not identified by the tax account, and I believe there are huge amount of cases, and the tax department is grappling with to close those assessment by 2016, because the deposits are made in Jandan account and they really are not able to either even serve the notices in those cases, because they really don't know who is having this accounts and who is the real owner of this. And in all those cases, how the assessments will be done and taxes will be recovered is a situation which is difficult to understand. Then the search has happened under 132 and the PO, prohibitory order, is passed under 132, restricting the anything you can do with that particular asset. But at the same time you also find out that the Benami, it is also a Benami transaction and you want to confiscate that property under the Benami law. The standard operating procedure says that in those cases the Benami law, because under the Benami law, section 67 of the Benami law says Benami law will override all of the provisions of the act. Benami law will override all of the provisions of the act. In those cases, the orders passed under provisional attachment orders or other orders passed in section 24 onwards, those cases the Benami law will override and prohibitory PO passed under the Income Tax Act will have no existence and the provisions of Benami law will be applicable. So these are some cases which the government has found out and how to do the assessment with that. Another interesting issue which is there is, what about religious and charitable trusts? In hundis huge amount of money is deposited, whether there will be Benami transaction. So section 58 of the Benami law provides a power to the government to issue notification and exempt all charitable religious trusts from the application of Benami law. Unfortunately, till date, at least I have not seen that notification. They should look at that because huge amount of funds would be collected by various religious places and they should try to protect them from the applicability of Benami law. We'll go to the broad procedure. Have 5-10 minutes left. So the procedure is like this. I will explain in nutshell. Basically, section 24 onwards. The first is section 24, which gives a power to do a provisional attachment. So under section 24, if the initiating officer, as I said, there are 4 categories of officers: initiating officer ACTC, approving authority additional commissioner, joint commissioner, administrator ITO, and adjudicating authority is the CIT, etc. So first step is the notice under section 24 subsection 1, where the initiating officer will say, I think that this property is Benami property and I am issuing notice why I should not treat this as a Benami transaction. And if he feels that there is a risk that this property will be sold out or transferred by the person, by the Benamidar or by the Benamidar, in those cases he can also issue a provisional attachment PA along with section 24(1) notice. That provisional attachment is for 90 days. So if the last few days you have seen that case of 1600 crores of attachment terminal, that is the first step where provisional attachment is made by the property. Attachment means you cannot do anything with that property, you cannot deal with that property, you cannot transfer, you will be able to use the property, but you cannot in any way transfer that property or do anything with that property. Once that is there, then 24(2) they will give you opportunity to show cause and give the details. 24(3) says that based on the evidences which are collected by the initiating officer, based on the evidences furnished by the assessee or the person, the initiating officer will take an action of either converting provisional attachment into full attachment or lifting the provisional attachment. So if I am able to demonstrate that it is not a Benami transaction, he has a power to lift the Benami transaction. Or if it is provisional attachment is there and he feels that the conditions of the law of being a Benami transaction satisfied, he will convert that Benami provisional attachment into a proper attachment and he will extend it till the disposal of appeal or by the decision by the adjudicating authority. So that is the next step under 24(3). If under 24(1) when he had issued a show cause notice, if he had not done provisional attachment because there was no fear that the property will be transferred, in those cases when he coming at the stage of 24(3), he can attach at that point of time also. So 24(3) is a critical phase where he will conclude that the property is Benami or not Benami. Now for this there is a time limit of 6 months from the initial show cause notice. So if initial show cause notice is issued in January, 6 months from the end of that month is the time limit for passing 24(3). Once the 24(3) is passed, the 24(3) and 24(4) is done, then the matter will be referred to the adjudicating authority. So it is a step before confiscation. It will be referred to the adjudicating authority. Adjudicating authority, as I said, is a CID. Within 30 days, the EO, the initiating officer, will have to refer to the adjudicating authority. Again, the procedure will continue before the adjudicating authority. Adjudicating authority will go through the documents and everything. And adjudicating authority will pass a final order saying whether actually it is a Benami transaction or not a Benami transaction. And if that time they pass in order that it is a Benami transaction, then the process of vesting of property in the central government and steps for confiscation by the central government can be started by the administrator. So administrator is the person who has to administer the property. So those steps can be taken by the administrator. The order passed by adjudicating authority can be appealed to the appellate tribunal formed under the Benami law. There is currently the bench is sitting at Delhi. So under you can make an appeal to the appellate tribunal. And if you make an appeal to the appellate tribunal, you can ask that these proceedings of confiscation vesting can be stayed. You will have to take that process. If you do not appeal, naturally they will proceed with the confiscation. So you can, within 45 days of the order of adjudicating officer, you have to file an appeal to the appellate tribunal. Then naturally the process before the appellate tribunal will go on. The appellate tribunal will hear the matters, hearing will happen. Lot of the procedures are very similar to our income tax appellate tribunal. There is a chairperson and other things are there. For paucity of time, we cannot go into that. Post tribunal's order, the appeal will go to High Court, and from High Court to the Supreme Court. High Court 60 days and Supreme Court will go by its own rules. So these are the things that we have to keep it in mind. So there is this is for attachment and confiscation of property. Imprisonment will be done by the Sessions Court, Special Court section formed under section 50 of the Act, where the existing Sessions Court will be, in most of the cases, Sessions Court will be considered as the special court for the purpose of Benami law, and the reference, the initiating officer or adjudicating authority will make a reference to the particular court, special court, saying that you start the proceedings for imprisonment of 7 years or 1 to 7 years, whatever it is, and you start that proceeding, which will be a separate proceeding. So this proceedings under the Act for confiscation will be separate. The proceeding for imprisonment will be separate. The proceedings for imprisonment can be started immediately. It doesn't say that you should start the proceedings for imprisonment only after adjudicating authority has confirmed it. It is very unfortunate. So just when a 24/1 notice is issued, at the same time the proceeding for imprisonment also can be started. There is no time gap that the officer has to look into. We can start that also. So this is the broad procedures, timeline and other forms and other things are also given in the law. These are the broad parameters which we have to look at. First, the main thing is section 2(9) definition of Benami transaction and whether the transaction falls in the Benami transactions. If you have any questions, we can take it or. So I thank again.
On the paying staff, this issue which we have, would that by any manner come under the ambit of Benami? Is it what?
In my view, see, the question is, you go back to the definition of Benami law. Is it a transaction carried out in fictitious name? Does someone deny the ownership of a transaction? Clause 1 would naturally not come because it is not the benefit for the condition of benefit would not be satisfied because the person who is providing consideration, it should be for his benefit. Okay, and there that test may not be satisfied. Can you say that person who has provided consideration is not traceable or fictitious? Possibly D would be something where they can try to fit it. Because if they say person who has purchased this penny stock and given you the consideration, and that person who has given you consideration of say X is not traceable or he is a fictitious person. If that test can be satisfied, demonstrated, the burden of proof under the Benami law is on the initiating officer. So he has to prove that the person who has given me consideration is either not traceable or fictitious. I don't think other clauses A, B, C can be there. And in clause D, the test would really be whether the person is traceable or not traceable or is a fictitious person. If they can demonstrate this, possibly D can be applied. Benami law will not be applicable. For example, if in my own case, if a search is done and 5 crores of cash is found, I am saying it is my cash, then Benami law cannot be applied. At the most, I will have to bear the consequences under the Income Tax Act for those cases, not for this thing. So wherever there is a source is unexplained, not necessary that that transaction will directly become a Benami transaction. Benami will come into picture where there is a Benami dar involved or a third person involved or a fictitious person involved. If it is my own income, there those cases I would feel that the law would not be applicable. Thank you. I thank you once again the Bangalore branch for giving me this opportunity and everyone for a patient hearing. Thank you.
Sir, one more question. Whether it is applicable to foreign properties?
Very interesting question. Whether you can apply this to foreign properties. The law really does not say anything whether the asset should be in India or outside India. On the floor of Parliament, the Finance Minister made a statement that this law will not be applicable to foreign properties, and to catch hold of foreign properties, we have Black Money Act. So we will catch them under the Black Money Act. This is the statement made by the Honorable late Mr. Narendra J Jain at that point of time when the bill was moved, which I would feel is not really correct, because under the Black Money Act, what you can really tax is your own asset. Now here we are talking on an asset which is in the name of Benami. Okay, the law per se does not talk of an asset in India or not, in India or outside India. The law really does not make any distinction for that, but they are saying that in those cases the Black Money Act will be there. Next point is, if the law is applicable, how will you confiscate that property? How will you go through the provision? That country will have to either have an understanding with us in terms of a treaty or any other thing where they can help us to confiscate that property and vest it in the central government, which looks very difficult, at least as the situation stands.
Section 1, it says it extends to whole of India.
So that is the whole of India.
So outside India also?
No, see, there is this whole of India where you have a transaction in India in terms of you have provided the consideration in India, but the property is outside India. That could be one situation. Second situation, you had purchased that property when you were outside India, and you had that source of that funds is unexplained. Okay. Now, if the first situation is there, where the transaction is really happening in India, but the property is outside India, transaction is happening in India and property is outside India, we can possibly argue that Section 1 would have an application. But where the situation is where the transaction itself happened outside India, just because a person is in India, it is not that the law could be applicable, because you are looking at the transaction and not the person. We are not looking at the person, we are looking at the transaction. The question is, where is the transaction? And if the transaction is outside India when the person was also outside India, can the law have territorial extension outside India? Would not, it would be difficult to provide for that.
Now it extends to applies to Jammu and Kashmir.
That is again debatable, subject to 370. What happens to 370 itself is not clear. Let Supreme Court hear it.
Friends, we had a detailed analysis of Benami Law. Criminal law made it retrospective. We have to wait and watch whether it stands before the court of law. So let us thank speaker for his valuable knowledge. As a token of appreciation and gratitude, we will present a gift voucher. May I request Kota Srinivas to come forward and do the honor. Please stand and take one. Friends, let us break for tea and reassemble in next 15 minutes for our next